Hi, thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Mandy Price, and I'm the CEO of Canaries. And we are fortunate to have Bobby Griffin with us today, who is going to be discussing and really helping us think about how organizations can continue to maintain and advance their culture during times of crisis. So I'm going to introduce Bobby, and then we'll just go delve right into the conversation. So Bobby is the head of diversity inclusion for CBRE, the world's largest commercial real estate services company with over 100,000 employees and operations in over 100 countries. In this role, Bobby works closely with leadership on the strategy and execution of CBRE's diversity and inclusion efforts and provides guidance at furthering positioning CBRE as an employer of choice. Prior to joining CBRE, Bobby was the global director of diversity and inclusion for Flowserve Corporation, a manufacturing and fluid motion services company with operations in over 50 countries that span 3 different global regions, and previously also served as global director of diversity and inclusion for Alcon Novartis, which also has operations in 75 countries across the world. Bobby has held various regional and national level human resource leadership positions in Fortune 100 companies and the consumer products goods, as well as the healthcare sectors, including at Coca-Cola Enterprises and Merck. In these roles, he successfully developed and implemented strategies, initiatives, and solutions that drove and supported diversity, inclusion, leadership development, and talent management. Bobby holds a bachelor's degree in business management from Abilene Christian University and a master's in business administration from the University of North Texas. So we are very, very fortunate to have Bobby's expertise and learn more about how organizations can continue to drive their culture and their strategy during this time of crisis. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, Bobby.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm very happy to be here.
So, Bobby, CBRE is over 100 years old. You have over 100,000 employees in 100 countries. As the global head of D&I, how are you managing your personal as well as your professional life during this crisis?
Well, like everybody else, this is definitely a new experience for all of us. So we're having to kind of adjust and make decisions at times on the fly as how we can best navigate this odd time that we're in, very unique time that we're going through. All of our personal and professional lives are merging to a greater extent than they definitely have in the past. So some of the things, I'll start with the professional aspect of it, because again, all of us are having to find ways to do this. But one of the things that I'm focused on is ensuring that we are pivoting to ensure that D&I remains relevant to all the business leaders during this time. An example of that, we're shifting some of our focus away from not as much talent acquisition to more being focused on developing our incumbent diverse population to make sure they're truly developed and engaged, to make sure that we don't lose a lot of the progress that we've worked so hard to gain over the years. So we're doing things like, when we are looking at talent, are we asking ourselves, is our virtual pipeline? I mean, how are we expanding our pipeline virtually and maintaining relationships around engagement? So how do we make those shifts? How do we and what are some of the things that we can do to ensure that D&I is more integrated into the activities and actions that we're taking versus being programmatic? Because as many of us know, many of the programmatic budgets are being cut or reduced. So how can we ensure that there's still a D&I lens on the things that we are doing? It's easy for an organization to say, or some leaders to think, D&I is something that we should set aside for now. And when everything is back to normal, the milk and honey is flowing again, then we'll pick this back up. But when it's a true value, the way you find out if something is a value in an organization is when you are in times of crisis and and we value D&I here, so we're having to look at ways to ensure that it still remains relevant and across the organizations. And so we're not setting it to the side until everything changes. Personally, you know, from a diversity inclusion standpoint, we've all told people about, you know, it's important to bring our whole selves to work. Well, now that's being shifted, and work is coming to our whole selves. So, so, so our work is coming into our personal lives, and as leaders and as an organization, we have to understand that and accept that merger. And it's no big deal when somebody's kid wants to be on the video, or their fur baby, their pet wants to chime in on the conference call or the video conference and those types of things, or people are in their t-shirts and all those types of things. But it's important that we make that transition. And again, work is coming to our whole selves now. For me personally, I work from home periodically anyway, so it's not completely new to me. But the way I'm managing that is try to maintain as much routine and consistency as possible, for not only for myself but for my team as well, in terms of, you know, availability and when I work and kind of regular meeting cadence. And then it's important from a well-being standpoint to get out every now and then. So I get out on a run. I try to get out on a run every afternoon, and I use that liberally. It's probably more of a slow jog than a run, but to try to get out, get some fresh air, and kind of stretch your legs, decompress. So I think all those things are important in this time, from a professional standpoint and then from a personal standpoint.
Well, Bobby, I can relate to so much of what you just said. You know, I have two small kids, and they run into my webinars and my meetings all the time. So I am just kind of looking up at the door, hoping that they don't bust in here. Because, like you said, there's definitely been an integration of work and life, and as it's never been before. And
before we go to the next question, I would like to make one other point around that. But please go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Bobby.
Well, to the point you were making, I thought you were going on to the next question, but you may not have been. But one thing that we have from a D&I standpoint, I think it's important for us to realize the disproportionate impact that this COVID-19 situation can have on various diverse groups, and those are from women to single parents to people of color to Asian Americans or Asians anywhere around the globe, because this working from home, most of us realize that women tend to share have a greater share of the burden of working from home, whether that's home taking care of the kids and making their education, or, you know, preparing the meals. Not that it's completely that men don't do this, but a disproportionate impact. So when everybody's home, then that can have a disproportionate impact on some of our female employees. From a financial impact standpoint, this often has a disproportionate impact on people of color, either on them directly or on their family members as well, because oftentimes people in various minority groups or women are the last ones in and first ones out. So when it comes to, you know, layoffs and those furloughs and those types of things, there's often a disproportionate impact. And as we've heard on the news, even a potential disproportionate impact on from a health perspective as well for many minority groups. So that's something to keep in mind as we're navigating that this isn't impacting everybody equally.
Such a great point, Bobby. And you know, as I think about some of the things you said, I think kind of merging some of the concepts as far as the fact that everyone is handling and dealing with this differently. I know when I think of my situation and the situation that I'm sure a lot of CBRE's employees are in the same boat as well, is now I'm also homeschooling my children, right, throughout the day. So how do I manage full-time work, leading the Canaries team, but then also homeschooling my children? And so as you kind of provide that guidance and maintain CBR's culture and commitment to to D&I. How do you communicate with management teams as far as how they should engage with remote employees? We know that, people, there has to be a level of accessibility, but how do we provide and provide that guidance that there has to be those boundaries? Like you said, it's important for you to go out on your walks. How do we set forth that culture to help managers recognize and address that maybe their employees can't be available at all times and answering emails, within a 5 to 10 minute time frame, which most of us are used to responding to?
Yeah, no, very, very good question. One of the things we have to just realize is that in times of crisis and pressure is one of the times when our biases can easily surface. And that's true for management as well. So if I have an underlying bias that if someone's working from home, say if it's anybody, but if it's a woman who is working from home, and I make a call and she doesn't answer, do I say, okay, well, she's not really working from home, air quotes, she's doing other things, most of her day is handling or taking care of the kids or homeschooling and all these types of things. Or if I have a bias toward millennial groups or something like that on how they work or their work style, are they really working? So one of the things we have to do is equip our managers with tools and resources to help them to understand how to lead a team remotely if they weren't before. How to not only lead that team, how to ensure that team is included, how to ensure that team is engaged. And one of the things, I was at a D&I event several years ago, and they divided the groups up by generational age group. And they asked each generational age group what another one of the groups wanted them to know, what they wanted another one of the groups to know about them. And one of the things that the millennial group told the rest of us was that to them, work was a verb, not a location. They said they worked in all these places with these quote unquote desk cultures where someone wanted to see them at their desk at a certain time of the morning or the evening. And they said, we could be playing solitaire at our desk. So basically, hold us accountable for getting the job done, and then give us the flexibility of getting it done the way we need to and where we need to. So I tell that story to say that's some of the guidance and advice we're giving our leaders as well, and equipping them with tools to help them to do that.
That's such great advice, Bobby. I think understanding and equipping managers to understand that work can happen in a variety of different parameters, and that everyone is going to have different issues and things that they're dealing with, right? Some people aren't dealing necessarily with children, but with elderly parents. And so I think during this time of crisis, people can feel more isolated, right? They could feel more overwhelmed. As a D&I leader, what actions are you taking to help people feel more included and less isolated during this time of crisis?
Yeah, and I'll start where I ended the last one, in that one of the things we're doing is equipping our managers by sending them direct information and via our learning management system on exactly how to do that, on giving them information on what people may be feeling during this time in terms of isolation or not being included, and then giving them guidance on exactly how to do that, how to ensure that they're connecting with
Okay, wonderful.
as a leader, and for the rest of our organization who are team members, giving them guidance on connecting with each other as well. And also, one of the things that we're doing is engaging our employee resource groups to partner with leadership to further connect, include, and engage employees during this time. Many of our employee resource groups were doing this anyway, but we're asking them to even enhance that, because they're a vital tool and resource to help us in any organization to do that. So I would ask, if you haven't done that, anybody out there, I would definitely recommend that you engage them and to take it to the next level, to enhance their network group or employee resource group maturity, and partnering with the business to help them navigate through this time.
So, Bobby, you talked a lot about kind of how D&I is ingrained into CBRE's culture, and making sure that that's integrated into every business unit and the overall strategy of every business unit, which is music to my ears, because we so much believe in that at Canaries. But can you talk a little bit about CBRE's culture in more detail, and how you're ensuring that that culture is maintained during this time of crisis when we know everyone's in survival mode? So how do we maintain that culture and ensure that there's a focus on maintaining that culture throughout the organization?
Sure. And I think we talked about some of the answer and a couple of the other ones, but one of the our culture. Well, first of all, let me back up and say we're a large organization. As you opened up, we're over 100,000 employees in over 100 countries around the world. So we have a lot of subcultures. And one of the approaches that we take to, again, even from a diversity and inclusion standpoint, is recognizing that and say we want to be globally aligned and locally relevant, meaning that we want to ensure that we're not a cookie cutter approach, but we understand those various cultures and those various opportunities. But one of the things from a culture standpoint, one of the things that does connect us all is that we have and aspire to have even more of a connected and collaborative culture. So that's important to us. That's an important aspect of our business strategy as well. One of the things we do, again, is if we're reminding our leaders, it all starts with leadership from the top down. That this is that connection and that collaboration is an important part of not only our culture, but our offering, our business offering to our various client groups. We're reminding them of that, and then equipping them, giving them information, tools, guidance on exactly how to do that with not only with our employees, but with our customers as well, we're all going through this challenging time, at the same time. And so don't set this to the side. And this is a part of our values. And as I mentioned earlier, oftentimes you as an individual or as an organization, we don't often know that if something is really a value until it's times of stress, times of crisis, because many things that we think are values, personal or professional, sometimes we find out they really weren't that valuable. They just sounded really good. And then, but now this is a test, for many organizations, including us. And and I'm happy to say that our leadership is stepping up to the task right now. And one of the ways that we maintain this in our culture as well is that many organizations, including ours, are at a time where you're making some tough decisions regarding, employees, whether that's hours or furloughs or layoffs. And one of the things that we can do to ensure we have this connected and collaborative culture is ensuring that even for those things that there's a D&I lens on that we want to ensure that we're not having a disproportionate impact on various groups if actions have to be taken anywhere in the world. So that's part of our culture as well. So we want to make sure that inclusion stays relevant and top of mind even in those tough decisions.
Do you think that a lot of the advancements we've made in inclusion, as far as the flexibility in the remote work, things that were in the past in some organizations considered would negatively affect your career, right? If you asked to work remotely from home full time. Do you expect going into the future after the crisis that this will be the new norm, that organizations will see that there's not really an impact to productivity, that teams can work remotely efficiently, and that there'll be kind of this offering that's given by more organizations? Do you think this is going to be the new norm?
Yeah, I actually do. It will definitely be more normal than it has been in the past. I don't know if it'll completely be the new norm, but but it definitely will be more normal as organizations who didn't, to your point, think that this was possible. Now they see it is, and they saw that individuals were just as productive, or even more so in many cases. I know I'm one thing about this. I value not having to have a hour drive into work each way. Uh, so they'll see in many cases that employees were more productive during this time. So while this crisis um, is definitely an unprecedented time and creates many challenges. Um, when we look back on it, it could either be a blip on the radar screen, or it's a true opportunity for our organizations, or a true opportunity to rethink the way we work, to challenge ourselves around what's the status quo around how we work, where we work, how we include people, how do we get ideas. And in many cases, people were working remotely already, some of their team, and were they really engaging them, including them to get the best ideas and engage them. So I think this opens up a lot of opportunities for us as organizations. And yes, I do think it will impact the way we work going forward.
Okay. So I wanted to remind everyone that's tuning into the webinar that we are accepting questions through the Q&A. So if you have any questions that you want to pose to Bobby, please submit those. We're getting some of those, and so we're getting some great engagement. And so, Bobby, I did want to take some time right now to open it up and get some questions from some of the panel, from some of our audience members that are chiming in. So for my first question, I have that CBRE has a strong corporate social responsibility focus. We've seen some companies helping the community, like Best Western, who opened up their vacant hotels near hospitals to house medical workers. What actions has CBRE taken to continue to serve the community?
Yeah, great question. And CBRE is proud to support the various communities around the globe in this effort. And the company has opened up a multi-million-dollar fund to invest in various philanthropic efforts to support COVID-19 impacted communities and individuals, from food banks to shelter, to also opening up a fund for our internal employees as well, for employees who are disproportionately impacted by this financially. They'll be able to get grants from the companies to help them and their families through this time. So a strong external focus, and our CEO was right up front in one of the early companies to do this, and again, setting up this fund with millions and millions of dollars to do this from a community standpoint, but also recognizing our own employees have this impact and helping them as well.
Okay, wonderful. That's fabulous. So for the next question I have is, COVID-19 has shown the importance of having paid leave and sick leave policies available to all employees, not just salaried employees. How has CBRE responded to provide paid leave, sick leave, and other health benefits to all employees?
Yes, and for us, it was something already had that in place, so we didn't have to make a big pivot for paid leave and sick leave. And one of the things that we did as well for employees who who weren't able to come into work, and even in those that couldn't work remotely, we've continued to pay them as well. Again, remote work was not a big shift for many of us, is that as I mentioned earlier, we work from home sometimes anyway, but others did not. But where that is the case, we have continued to pay individuals.
Okay, wonderful. That's fabulous. So we've got some other questions as well. One of the questions here is wanting to share some specific examples of the way the D&I team is adding value. And subsequent to that, also, does CBRE plan to let its people work from home in the future? And so I think you just answered that component. I think, earlier in the conversation, you talked about making sure that D&I maintained a priority within the organization. If tough decisions are being made, looking at that through a D&I lens. to ensure that there's not any disproportionate effects. But maybe you can talk a little bit in more detail about some of the other ways you're adding value, because that's extremely valuable in maintaining that culture, as well as I know previously you also talked about kind of equipping the managerial team with how to effectively manage teams remotely. So any kind of other ideas that the D&I teams can do, because on this call is primarily chief diversity officers and heads of human resources, on kind of things they can do to continue to propel D&I within their teams.
Yeah, and great question. And those two of them are two of the key ones that you mentioned as well. And a third one that I mentioned earlier is working directly with your employee network groups or employee resource groups, engaging them and equipping them on to do, if they were already doing this, how to do this to a greater extent. There are lots of tools, resources. Catalyst has some, if any of you have access to Catalyst, I know they have some great resources out there, and many other companies have listed, have information out there as to how to engage employee network groups to do more during this COVID-19 period. Also, another things you can do as you're working with your talent learning and development partners, as many of them are maybe canceling in-person trainings. One of the things that you need to do is connect with them if they're shifting to virtual trainings. I know many of ours are, to make sure that there's a D&I lens even on that virtual training. Because we made it a point to, when we had in-person training, to ensure that we're part of that was focusing on D&I when we were doing leadership training. But as we shifted this virtual, make sure that your companies don't lose sight of that D&I aspect of the virtual training as well.
So Bobby, one of the other things you talked about was as we think about, the fact that some programmatic budgets may be cut, making sure that we're still thinking about D&I, not just from a talent acquisition perspective, but from how do we continue to do trainings? How do we continue to engage our current employees and retain them? And so wanted to talk a little bit more about that. I know the question we got were about some tools. And so some of the things we do at Canaries hit right the nail on the head with that when you were talking earlier about the focus to ensure that this is something that as an organization, we maintain that priority. And so we also have some tools to kind of spur that employee engagement, to get that feedback and to nail that down into data-driven insights so that organizations can really optimize their DEI strategy. But I think it becomes even more important in a remote work setting that we engage in these employee engagement assessments, be able to see where we're seeing any kind of statistical anomalies between groups so that we could put forth the strategies needed to ensure that we're able to retain all aspects of our population and further kind of drive that talent. So I'm sorry, I'm seeing another question here, so I'm trying to read the questions at the same time as we're talking. In reference to learning and development, could you share examples of ways to ensure that it is diverse? Do you mean the type of people who attend? I'm not exactly sure what that question means.
Well, I could answer it generally. If that one of the things we've done, we have an initiative in place. Even this was prior to COVID-19. That basically says that any leadership development training that part of our organization, we have, well, let me back up a little bit. We have a central leadership development training curriculum called our CBRE. And so any part of our organization that's sending a contingent for leadership training at CBRE, that contingent has to at least match the diversity of the group that's the organization that's sending it, or the region, the broader of the two. So for example, if there's a group that's sending, an organization that's sending, I don't know, 30 people to training, in their organization is 40% women, well, that contingent they're sending for leadership training has to be at least 40% women. Now, it could be more, it could be 50, 60, but it couldn't be 20%. So that's one of the things that we have done to ensure that our leadership development is diverse. And we do that same thing for ethnic diversity and other types of diversity as well. And we'll hold that same, keep that same initiative in place even when the training becomes virtual. If people have to be invited or recommended for this training, we want them to have that diverse lens on that to ensure that we have a diverse pipeline. So if that's where they were going with it, that's
I think so, Bobby. I know sometimes when we're typing fast, and when we can't, be able to have that direct communication, it's hard to kind of get whether we were answering a question. But I think you did a fabulous job, and I think that's exactly where they were going. I have another question here that someone posed, and again, if you have any questions, you can just type them in to the Q&A bar. We'll maintain your anonymity. And so I have a question here that says, when talking and trying to obtain buy-in from people that don't share and value D&I, what are some tips? And I know that this is a struggle that some D&I professionals struggle with within their organization. And I know that the kind of business case for diversity and inclusion has long been proved, right? We have decades of research that shows D&I improves not only financial performance, but increases employee engagement, innovation. There's just so many benefits of it. Kind of what do you recommend if someone, even if they've kind of done this business case analysis, what are tips they can do to really move forward and get buy-in from their leadership for D&I?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's worked for me is starting with the business instead of starting with the D&I side of it. For all of us on the call, we're passionate about D&I, we get it, and other D&I people would get it right away. And it's sometimes frustrating to understand when some leaders don't get it, but start with what's keeping them up at night. Start with what's their goals, understanding, with the conversation, asking questions, asking them, what are their goals? What are their challenges? What are their opportunities to drive and build business? And then come out with how D&I fits into that, how D&I is the answer to that. Because I feel like oftentimes we lead with the D&I story, the D&I value, the D&I components instead of the business components. So just flipping that around and saying, here is how, if you're being challenged with increasing your revenue or increasing your customer base, well, here's how D&I plays a key role in that. If your organization is doing engagement surveys and as a leader you're being challenged with how you can increase your engagement score, well, then talk to them about how inclusion is a key component of engagement, and that if you don't include employees, if you're not inclusive in your approach, they're not going to be fully engaged. They may stay around and keep their nose clean so you can't fire them, but they're not going to be as engaged as they otherwise would be. Or if retention is an issue, again, this is how you retain organizations, your team. And so you start there with how D&I can help to answer some of the challenges and the questions they have, or some of the challenges they're facing.
So Bobby, we've got another question here that talks about kind of suggestions on how do you send out employee engagement surveys during COVID-19 that are specific to the issues that organizations may be facing during this time, and looking for some resources. So Canaries actually provides that. We help organizations. We have some COVID specific questions that we are able to work with organizations to send out to their workplace that really helps to deal with the unique issues that employees may be facing at this time. But are there any other tips or suggestions you have as far as doing this employee engagement with a COVID lens?
Yeah, I think one of the things that at this time we have to be sensitive to, um, well, all the various communications that are going out and to the organization and all of their focus. And so, manage the number of surveys that we're sending to employees during this time, and ask ourselves, what's the right time to do this? When will they have the space in their to really complete this survey, and when will it gain relevance? So that's the first question. One of the first questions we should ask, should we send this now or not? But if you do send it, ensuring that it is relevant, that it captures the what everybody's dealing with now, and is there an opportunity? And third, ask if there's an opportunity to combine it with something else, another communication, another survey, because what you don't want is various surveys, or whether that's engagement or anything else, coming out from different groups in different directions to an organization. And sometimes with large organizations such as ours, we have to manage that, because we can easily inundate our employee population by sending something that we didn't even know another group was sending. So that coordination is important. So timeliness, coordination, and relevance are all things to consider.
Okay, wonderful. So I want to remind everyone again that they can submit questions through the Q&A. We're getting some great questions, but I want to make sure that we're able to answer everyone's questions, because a lot of times we get a flurry of questions at the end as the webinar is ending, and so then we're not able to address all those questions before the webinar is over. So we only have a couple more minutes, so I want to make sure that we are able to get everyone's questions answered. Bobby, as we think about kind of some of the unique populations, again, I just wanted, because our previous webinar that we did was on Ramadan and supporting kind of Muslim employees during that time. Trying to think about as far as how do we again ensure that we are thinking from a managerial standpoint of ensuring that everyone's situation and circumstances are different. I know you talked about those toolkits, and I wanted to let people know as well that on Canaries, we do have some toolkits and some resources that we offer there as well, that people can use to help provide this insight to their managerial teams, so that they are equipped with how to navigate and manage their employee base during this remote work setting. So Bobby, we have another question here as far as what are some other resources, books, blogs, podcasts that you like to go to stay current on DEI?
Yeah, and some of the things that I do, I'm connected to, and our organization is connected to several of the various organizations that are out there, and Canaries will be on that list as well. Starting there, and some of the great resources that have been mentioned here today. But in addition to that, things like I connect with Catalyst and Diversity Inc., CEB Gardner, and various different organizations such as those, to understand and kind of get relevant information, to get tools and resources and that are out there. Because any organization then should have some, not only philosophical D&I approaches, but very practical tools. And like some of those that have been mentioned here today, because I'm into very practical tool, because philosophical and conceptual D&I sounds nice and we can all wax philosophic on it. But at the end of the day, when you have to roll up your sleeves and get things done, I'm looking for very tactical resources to help me to influence a broader strategy, and but very behavioral, very tactical, very specific. And so those are some of the organizations or sites and things that I go to.
Well, Bobby, thank you so much. That was so helpful. We want to thank you so much for your time today. Is the insight that you've provided has been really, really helpful, and I know it's helped a lot of the other D&I and HR practitioners that have joined us today to really think about how they continue to not only drive D&I but maintain their organization's culture at the same time. We've got one question here saying, what does the name Canaries mean? And so we actually chose that name. It comes from canary in the coal mine, as far as helping to alert and to ensure that we provide that first alert for organizations to continue to maintain that healthy culture, that healthy environment. And so that's what the name means. I want to make sure that everyone also knows that we have a recording. We recorded this webinar, so it will be made available. As I mentioned earlier, do have that resources page where we will post this recording. We'll send it out in an email after the session today, but we'll make sure that we have all those other resources that we listed available as well, as far as those practical instructional guides that we mentioned during the webinar as well. So thank you so much for all of your time. And I'm so excited to talk with a leader like you, Bobby, as far as the way you continue to push the D&I envelope forward. And I look forward to, again, helping to supplement and drive D&I forward with all of your organizations as well, with the resources that we're able to provide.
Well, thank you very much. And the pleasure is mine. I look forward to it as well. So take care, and take care, everybody.
All right, thanks.